replay. I gotta replay. You guys, my DJ skills have
With
like.
the bop, with the bop.
Hey,
What up?
what's up, Ahmed?
How you doing?
How's it going?
Good, good, good. You know, that song just does stuff to you, you know?
Oh, for real,
Like a
it
spiritual.
does.
It's a spiritual awakening.
Yeah. Does that song do anything to anybody else? Let us know what city you're coming in from. Destiny
Yeah,
said,
right?
bro. Christine on the beat said, I miss you.
Yo, we out, we out, we out.
That's awesome. How's your day been, Ahmed?
Good, you know, same four walls as typical. Today was not a make up a random grocery trip for a miscellaneous ingredient to try a dish for the first time kind of day. Some days are those days. It wasn't today though.
Okay, that's what's up.
Yeah.
We see Houston is here, Miami's here, rep your city. And
Billy.
today we actually have a very special icebreaker today because our purpose is to cultivate community. So we want to model that. I'm going to go ahead and type the topic and the question. Do you remember the question, Ahmed? Or do you want me to say it?
I think I remember it, but you should say it because I feel like I'll mess up the way we phrase it.
All right, you all, you got to get ready to respond on this one. Ready? We want to know what's your guilty pleasure song? What is your guilty pleasure song? And if you want to expound on that, Ahmed, go ahead.
Yeah, so guilty pleasure song is like the song that you love, but you feel like people judge you for liking it so much. You know what I mean? So you might be like by yourself a little bit and how much you love it, but you don't care. Because when it drops, it's still like you tune out everybody else and it's your thing.
All right. So what's your guilty pleasure song? Put it in the comments. Put it in the comments. Ahmed, what's yours while everyone is putting theirs in?
Yo, you know, I don't care about the judgment, but the Rent song, Seasons of Love, felt like 525,000.
Oh, I love that.
Love that shit.
You know
Yeah,
what?
I've never seen the musical, but the song is just like drops.
That's awesome. Why don't you read some of the
Kai
ones?
said R. Kelly. Kai, we're gonna have to talk about that, man. All the judgment.
Okay, I'm putting in the comments now. What's your guilty pleasure song? Okay. So Anne says Broadway classics. What else do we see, Ahmed? What else we got?
I saw R. Kelly popped up on there. Hamilton soundtrack. Okay. Kevin Gates. Kelly Rowland. Yeah.
Let's see. Hamilton, Kevin Gates. There was someone that said Savage Remix.
Oh, that came out like today.
It really? I haven't.
Yeah, or like yesterday, right? The Beyonce version. I mean, Beyonce is so multifaceted. She just kind of like is a genre chameleon.
Shout out to Jersey. Principal Raymond. Is it Raymond is here from Jersey. New York City.
Sounds of
Miami.
Music.
Montgomery, Alabama. Chicago's here. Okay. Ugly Beard Gang, I see. Oh, you got some jokes out there, Gerard.
Yo, listen. Right now, it's like no haircut season going on.
Man,
so
it's no haircut.
We embrace it. It is what it is.
I'm over here struggling to do my eyebrows. Alicia Keys, everything. Take a Bow, Madonna and Babyface. Biggie, Dead Wrong.
Oh, nice.
Gotta love it. All right, so it's 9:03, and first and foremost, I want to thank you, Ahmed, for joining me tonight on this live ed chat. Thank you to everyone who is in this community right now. We really appreciate you just showing up and just showing up as your real self. This is a place for us to just get to know each other, engage with one another, cultivate real community. This isn't like I tell all the guest speakers, it's not a keynote speech. We're just engaging with each other, keeping it real, learning and growing and having fun while we're doing it. So thanks again, Ahmed. Why don't you start us off, Ahmed, with share a little bit about yourself so that for those of you, if you don't know him, now you're going to get to know him. This man is just like a legend.
Hardly.
He's done amazing work across the country. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, your experience in education, and then we'll jump into pandemic talk.
Yeah, definitely. So my name's Ahmed. It made it really easy to bubble in multiple choice questions as a kid. It made it also really interesting when you always have that conversation with kids where they're like, wait, so hold on. You're like, yeah. So like at some point in like November or December, they figure out what your first name is, and then they like spend until like February before they actually believe that it's a real thing because they like think it's a joke. Um, but anyway, so I mean, I currently work for an organization called Overcoming Racism. What we do is we do equity and specifically anti-racism professional development. We work with schools, school districts, nonprofits, charter networks, as well as like state institutions, state boards of education. Originally, I was a middle school teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, for Atlanta Public
Hey,
Schools.
ATL.
I know. Where my middle school folks at? We are like the craziest people in the world because middle schoolers are confused. They don't know who they are. And if you
Damn.
like give in to them just being in this space where they don't know who they are and nothing really makes sense, then you can actually understand them. You know, you can't work with middle schoolers if you try to control them. It's just not a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I transitioned to teacher coaching and development through Teach for America and the Center for Transformative Teacher Training. So I was a real-time teacher coach. Then got into school administration, school leadership in charter schools in New York, specifically in Brooklyn, and more specifically in Brownsville. So my
Okay.
New York
Brownsville,
City, Brooklyn, Brownsville
where you
folks, stand up.
at? Stand up.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people loving middle school. Yes, the middle school love is real. I also spent, 8 years in middle school. So
Yep. Yep.
I definitely know you just never, it's elementary to trying to be adult and grow, but not
Yeah.
really.
You just gotta let them. You gotta let them live. You know. You gotta let them do their thing. When you give up
Mad love
control,
and
you learn.
respect for middle school educators.
Right.
So you started your career in Atlanta, teaching middle school, and you were also leading a school leader up in Brooklyn, in Brownsville, and now you're working across the country, training a variety of different teams and staffs and adults about overcoming racism. So talk a little bit about like that experience. I know you guys have been rated like top sessions in the National Charter School Conference. Talk a little bit about your work there and maybe like how some of it, you're seeing some of it tie into like what's happening right now.
Yeah, so what we specifically do, a series of like consulting and support with these schools and networks, particularly like individuals in areas in which they've like committed to an anti-racism stance, committed to an equity agenda, and they're trying to figure out how that lives and breathes and where they are along that process, along that continuum. Um, so, I mean, we do from that end, but also like the big thing that we do is we actually like train people on the history of oppression, the history of racism, how that really plays into the work that they do on a daily basis. And if I'm connecting that to like what's happening now, I mean, COVID-19 and all the atrocities that have taken place has really kind of like peeled back and made more apparent what has always been true, which is that who you are, your background, your identities, your racial identity more specifically, determines life outcomes in this country and more broadly in the globe. But it's really just apparent here. And it's not a new phenomenon. It's something that's been connected to really how this country is founded, created, and currently sustained. So it just comes to a head. So I've spent a lot of time in recent weeks connecting with people that we worked with previously, and they're like, yo, it's like hitting home, right? Like it's a different experience to now really just see it blatantly apparent, to see the resource inequities and how those play out for kids and families and communities, health disparities, law disparities, access, political disparities, all of those things kind of come to a head. So I think a lot of people are becoming more aware because it's in your face right now, even though it's always been there.
Yeah, that's real. So, I mean, even, and there was someone here that did say they're curious to hear a little bit more as you're talking and speaking tonight, just about your transition from like teaching and going into anti-racism work. But I do want to speak to what you said around, like the inequities that are happening right now. And this is something that honestly it's been sitting really, really heavy on my heart, particularly because, I think it's difficult watching other people obviously go through this, right? And like lose their loved ones. And I have to say that it hits different. And many of it hits different when it's like your own family, right? And when there's so many questions that I even have right now, and I can't imagine if it's like this for me, what it must be like for our school leaders, for the families that we serve, for our kids, right, that we're checking up on, but we're asking them to like show up at 8:00 a.m. in the morning every day, when there's just so much around inequities. And so maybe talk about your experience in this time, what you're seeing, any like advice that you have, the socio-emotional part. Let's talk about that, because I know this is just really heavy. It's
Yeah.
really, I mean, really heavy for me, especially right now.
Yeah. I mean, like these are very uncommon and unprecedented times in the to the extent that like the entire world is watching this unfold, and the entire world, at least in part, is affected, right? Not to equal not equal ways, but everyone's being affected by it. Like one thing that really struck me is when, when Dr. Oz got on TV and talked about like, hey, we could do this plan and end up with like 3 to 4% like loss, right? And I'm literally just thinking from the context of like being a school leader and what the effect would be if we're talking 3 to 4%, and I have like 4 grade levels and there's 100 kids in each one of them. I'm losing like 3 to 4 kids per grade level, right? We're literally talking about like 12 to 16 like children. Can you imagine like the impact? And that's like an individual school. So there's like a level of disconnect that exists from like what that actually means for a lot of people. And I think, educators, I always maintain are like the best people in the world because we have amazingly difficult jobs and, arguably impossible. And in a lot of ways, we just are really about like just making stuff happen in the absence of resources, in the absence of support, in the absence of what should be in place. And we still do. Like we raise, at least in part, the children of this country, right? We instill in them everything that we have and things in the curriculum and beyond it. And like industries right now are figuring out how to pivot to this like new normal, and schools did it in a week, right? Like
Right.
literally when this schools closed down, and in a week educators put their heads together and they're like, this is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Like we don't have a million meetings, we don't have a long runway.
Yeah.
And you have to know how amazing.
Excuse me, by the way, that's
Yeah,
what that often takes districts 2 years, 18 months to 2 years to plan out.
Yeah, easily. For the smallest things, right? Like we used to joke in New York City that, it took 6 months to change a light bulb, right? That's why teachers go and buy out their own light bulbs and replace them in their classroom, right? But, I think it's just remarkable what they've done. And if I had to like give advice, it'd have to be that, if you're continuing on as if business is normal, right? Like things are carrying on as regular, then what's likely happening is that you're missing the scale of what's taking place. Right? Like nothing about this is normal. And, school has to evolve as well, like even in this time. It just has to. It inevitably has to take place. It is not feasible or appropriate to say, great, we're just going to like now get on an online virtual platform and this is going to be the exact same thing as what school was for everybody prior to that juncture. It's just not the case. I get on a lot of calls and people are like, yeah, it's just like when we're in, no, it's not like when we're in person. And it's okay that it's not. And it's okay to give ourselves grace if there's an acclimation period for us, for young people, for adults, for the literally the global community. If you're not okay in this moment, that's appropriate, right? If you're having a hard time sleeping or getting up or feeling motivated, that's appropriate. If you're feeling really, motivated and getting a lot of things done and jumping into passion projects, that's appropriate as well. Right? There's nothing that's off or wrong about an individual's response to trauma, because that's what this moment is. It is trauma. So, have grace for yourself and everybody else.
I love that. And so right now, I think there's also, so we know that this is not normal, right? That we're all experiencing this crisis. And I think what a lot of leaders, even myself, like what we're all grappling with is first and foremost, like oxygen mask. What does this look like for me in this time of crisis, right? And still knowing that I still have to serve my community because that's my job, that's my calling, right? And literally I'm living that right now, knowing that my grandfather passed yesterday and like it was a really public thing, right? Like because he was a pastor, we streamed this all live with him on the ventilator, a virtual almost like goodbye, right? And like knowing how difficult that is. And I think we were blessed just because we have a family member who is a nurse in the hospital. So we were actually able to like see that whole process. And I'm thinking about how do I find my balance within all of that? And then how do we find it for those people how do we create a space for the people that we currently serve, right? Like, how do I show up for you tonight? How do I show up for the live at chat community tonight, knowing like the emotional weights that we carry? And this is the work of leadership, right? So and I would love to also hear from our audience, like, what are some of the things that you are doing? For me, I just left a mindfulness session at 7 o'clock with Dr. Holm and a group of people, right?
Right.
What are your thoughts, Ahmed?
Yeah, I mean, one, like, condolences, like, my heart goes out to you and your family. And I think what happens, and a lot of times in these traumatic moments, we realize the gaps that exist, and we realize the things that play out in our favor, right? Like the privileges and blessings that we have, the
Right.
resources that we have access to. So there's this kind of like cognitive dissonance that easily happens. I think the thing that is always key for me, and has really just been like what I've tried to commit myself to, just as a person that works with young people and a person that works with leaders and educators all over the country, is that, like, you kind of have to be transparent and 100% yourself, right? You just have to, and be vulnerable with the uncertainties that you feel, with the moments in which you don't have the answers, the moments in which you need help, the moments in which you're responding to something that's difficult. When you try to hide that, then what you are likely doing is that you're modeling something that's unrealistic and
Wow.
disconnected to what, like, a human truth is. And
Yeah.
what you likely find is that however way you orient or respond to something, there is somebody else who feels the same way. And
Yeah.
seeing you in a position of leadership share that experience allows them to then be vulnerable at that same
Give
time.
permission.
And
Right.
I see some folks that I used to work with are on here as well. And, like, I was really, really particular as a leader to just be like, I don't know, right? Like, I don't, like, let's put our heads together. I'm not here positioning myself as if I have the answer to every question, as if I'm the one who's most composed and put together and, like, got it figured out and have managed my emotions perfectly and all of those things. Like, I'm not. I'm human and I'm flawed, just like young people are, and we have to create space for that. And just like our teachers and our staff and all those folks are, and we have to create room and space for that. I think that's what modeling is. It's the authenticity to it.
This is a common thing that keeps coming up. It's like, so how do I show up in this season? It's authenticity, being okay with saying
Not
I
being
don't
okay.
know, I'm looking, I'm not okay,
Yeah.
having grace. What do you think stops people from showing up authentically during this time?
Yeah, I mean, like, the short answer is that spaces or institutions in this country are not made for everybody to be able to show up as themselves. They're not. And schools are an institution, and particularly in this country, specifically when you talk about, like, white supremacist culture, it is not. It does not create space for people of color to show up as their authentic selves. So
Mm,
you have to put this, proxy, this version of yourself, this representative that shows up every day. It was like an
yeah.
interesting thing. My first like I transitioned to a school in Brownsville, Brooklyn, stood up as a school leader to introduce myself to the staff. And you had to do, like, fun facts about yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I stood up and I was like, how y'all doing? My name's Ahmed, da, 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 da. I love Hennessy and trap music. And, like,
Love it.
that's in a lot of ways, that's like professional suicide, right? But then people were like, I, like, I'm with you, or maybe, like, I'm not, but now I feel like I know who you are, right?
Right.
And I think what happens, like, there's a level of bravery that has to take place, and to be honest, like, doing that in that moment, like, there's a lot of privileges associated with that, right? I was like, well, if they fire me over this, which is like a problem, like, I'll be fine, right? I'll be able to get another job. I will, what I mean? There's a level of like sexism associated with, like, men can assert themselves more in those spaces than women can, and that's a privilege that I had,
Mm,
right? Like, as a
yeah.
heterosexual cisgendered male in that space. So I'm not saying that, like, that's easy. Everybody just walk around and, like, be your authentic self, because there are risks that are associated with that. And at the same time, those risks have nothing to do and are not representative of flaws in you. They're representatives of an institution that wasn't designed for you. And we need to not lie and not pretend like that's not the case.
Right.
And for a lot of the kids that we serve, like, that is exactly what's happening. They walk into a space that doesn't welcome them, and they don't have the privileges, the access, and the resources to be themselves. So we have to create that and lower that wall and that barrier to allow them to take that mask off, to allow them to be themselves and say it's okay. Good, bad, and in between.
Yeah. Wow. So I want to just bring in a few of the comments that we're hearing on that, and then I want to pick up right where you were. I have suggested journaling for some who can coach, finding a buddy who you can touch bases with regularly, the consistency, knowing you have someone who will listen and you will be available too. How many of us are doing that? It is so critical. Shout out to King Gerald LDL. You have some preach. Ahmed's in here. We wear the mask. I feel like I have to keep it together in order to not freak out my staff. Amen to that. Yes, removing the mask. Yes, we have nothing to lose but our chains. And then it says black role can linger afford to wear a mask any longer, our kids' lives are at stake. What are your thoughts, Ahmed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true because, you know, like there's so much that's at risk that takes place. And at the same time, to a leader, to some extent, like there is a level of like being the calm and the individual that people look to know how they should react to a situation, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I used to like have people on my staff who were like, things don't seem like they phase you. And I was like, oh, yeah, they do. They do. I'm just selective about how I process internally and externally what that is. But I'm not one who's going to walk around and be like, everything's fine if it's not, right?
Right.
So I'm not going to embellish and I'm not going to dissuade from that. So those pressures do exist, and it's not about, you know, being 100% perfect with it or being 100% flawed in it. It's about knowing what the desired outcome is and always like assessing your actions and whether or not they're in alignment with modeling and representing how you actually want people to step into a space.
Yeah. I see Curtis Palm. Curtis is in here. Palmore. He said, "What's up, Ahmed?"
There you
Um,
go. There's our Brooklyn leaders.
yeah. So we have Hot Sauce and Collar said Black folks can no longer afford to wear the mask.
Yep.
And so this is so real. Like, so what is it that? What are some things that we should be doing to create these spaces for our staff and for our kids?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting right
And
now because
excuse me, and the opportunities right now too.
yeah, so right now in the middle of like COVID-19, right? Like there's this kind of like everything's collapsed and you know it's crazy or whatever. But I mean, I, I think that like you always have to operate in like towards an orientation to equity and like dismantling systems that don't serve people, right? And right now in the really like functional collapse of a system, that to me is like a glaring opportunity to really just assess stuff that didn't work before, and to adjust and change it because you can, right? Like you have the capacity to in this juncture, and it's about identifying what's in your locus of control. So if you're like the thing that you can disrupt in this moment is a grading policy, then do that. If the thing that you can disrupt in this moment is you know, what does trauma-informed care look like in schools? Like, then do that. If the thing that you can disrupt in this moment is, you know, determining hiring and recruitment practices and approaches and strategies, then do that. Because you know what? Those systems right now are literally have been collapsed in the way that they've existed. So this is like a golden opportunity to be like, well, you know, like curriculum for next year as it was previously written is probably not going to work, and we all know that. So we're going to have to do curriculum work. Here's me like inserting that equity lens and doing it now, right now, in preparation for what's going to happen.
So you brought up grading just briefly
Well,
because
it's
we
a
don't have
hot
a
topic.
whole lot of time. That's a hot topic.
Yeah.
It is literally a hot topic right now for a lot of people. Can you briefly talk? I learned this from you, just like the history of grading, where it comes from, what we should be thinking about, and then we'll end on engagement and some things that we could be doing around engagement because that's a big one also.
Yeah. Yeah. So like it's interesting. So I'm like a history person, right? Like you can speculate about stuff in the moment, but if you don't ground it in history, then you don't really know where you came from. First of all, the education system in this country, like K to 12 education, wasn't really compulsory across 50 states till 1918. Right. So we're literally like barely 100 years into like K to 12 education being a thing. And even at that point, like that compulsory nature of it was like through elementary school. Like the 12 portion of it like came later. But you know, it wasn't mandated up until that juncture. And grading really dates back to, if you want to think about this country, early higher ed, Harvard, and like early higher Harvard, and then like Yale, some schools in Massachusetts, like Mount Holyoke. And what they did is like the earliest version was literally like a means of assessing whether or not a person is proficient to move forward. It was not like, here's your grade, right? The modern idea of like giving people marks and showing them wasn't a thing that started happening until the 1800s, and that was only in higher ed, right? That's when those like A, B, C, D, F like scales started to exist. And even then, there was just like a lot of dispute around the validity of them. And then when you started putting in 100-point scales, people really didn't like it. It wasn't really until you get to like Dewey and the like education movement, and you're talking about like in the 1930s and 40s, that we start seeing in public schools, we start having grades that we share with people and we give to them in particular. And it's not until the 70s, like literally there was a study that said in 1971, only 2/3 of public schools in this country actually assigned letter grades. So like we have not been doing this for a long time, and yet we have a huge investment in grades. We act like it is like foundational to education. It is the most critical and important thing, and it is like the only metric and tool that exists. And I'm like, we don't even know enough. We haven't been doing it long enough to even know that.
And let me just speak on this just for a moment. There are a lot of schools out there, and I'm going to name this right now because we have to bring this to the forefront. We have to be talking about this. there's almost an obsession with grades right now, to the point where grades are taking precedence, right? They are a priority over the socio-emotional health and well-being of our staff members and of our kids, right? And so thank you for naming and just giving us a little bit about the history. What do you think about that? Like, just like the how some folks are over prioritizing grades right now in this window.
Yeah, I mean, short answer, it's a tool of white supremacist domination, period. Now, if we want to like extrapolate from that point, like grading was solely created not as a means of actually pushing the practice of the individual you're grading, but as a means of communication with institutions. When you started having a lot of schools and universities and colleges and high schools, you had to know how the student was doing on like a universal scale. Like that was the purpose, just communication. And now, like we literally use it as a tool of control. We know that giving evaluative feedback, right, is not a thing that pushes practice. That is also why when you go to the gym and you're trying to work out and you're working with the trainer, like they don't give you a letter grade. That doesn't push your practice in any capacity. So like we know that it doesn't work, and yet we're connected to it because we've created an institution in education that is grounded in this idea of control. And I mean, you know, if I'm like let's be real about it. States have canceled testing formally, which who does that, right? Like we love testing in K-12 education. We canceled it. The IRS has delayed taxes. The NBA got shut down. Like things that we think are forever are no longer happening. And why in the hell do we feel like grading still needs to be a thing right now? You know, like grading makes the fundamental assumption that you're creating like an equitable means of evaluation because people have the same access to the same curriculum, the same access to the same resources, the same access to the same education. So we evaluate them and have the same bar. That foundational thing is not even true right now. People don't have equitable access because they're not even going to school. So if it was me, I'd be like, we don't, grades ain't even a thing right now. I mean, completion, maybe, sure. Like attendance, I would look at those metrics in terms of determining engagement. Are they there? But like giving someone a letter, like it's just, it doesn't serve anything. And don't even get me started on the retention component of it. We're talking about like retaining kids, even if they haven't shown proficiency between now and no.
What I hear a lot from schools is that they are still like, I don't think there's any kids that are being retained. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that is what I've wrong, but that is what the continued thing that I keep hearing. Let's read some of the comments. Disrupt what you can disrupt, and to never revisit the systems that failed us to begin with. We have a chance to create it all post-COVID. This is where leaders lead. How well do you know your folks? This is a big one. Kai actually spoke about this Monday night. How well do you know your folks? Checking on your people. Do you connect with your faculty that may be hourly? Y'all do not forget about custodial staff,
listen,
maintenance staff, about your you know, your cafeteria,
the backbone to any school building.
I'm sorry?
The backbone to any school building.
That's right. The backbones of our school building, your cleaning crew, all those people. As a leader, a call from you is priceless. So that's a tip right there. I've been disrupting work overload. Curtis said, and yes, Kai was trying to clown Curtis over here. Yes,
sounds about right.
Curtis has social media, Kai. Trauma-informed care will be huge in September when schools reopen.
100%.
Absolutely. Stop doing what we should have been stopped. King Gerald DL said, book Weapons of Mass Instruction. Ooh, okay.
There you go.
Have you read that one?
Yeah.
Okay, I need to read that one. Bloom's taxonomy wasn't used for what it is now either.
No, it's not.
Right. People just saying hello, somebody. If anyone is grading right now, the only thing they're measuring is privilege. Boom.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody needs to put that on like an Instagram quote tile. Like,
yeah.
That should be the new viral thing.
That's a good one.
I mean, that's what's happening.
And what he said, Curtis said, $100 billion industry assessment companies.
Yes.
The kids are obsessed with their grades too right now. Oh, of course.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like they've been.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say they've been habituated to that, right? Like as a tool of control, right? And that's literally all it's doing. And to be honest, like as an educator, if the only way I can get a kid to do something is by giving them a grade for it, I've already lost the battle. I've already lost. I've lost the battle completely. If I have to have grades in place in order for them to like acquire knowledge and for them to learn, I've lost. It doesn't set them up for success. You know, like we don't do that. I mean, can you imagine, like, again, like let's use a fitness example. You work with the trainer, you go to the gym, like you're out of shape, you're trying to get in shape, and your trainer gives you a letter grade each day. Like there's a good chance that if you were already in shape, you're going to get a good grade, you're going to want to come back. If you're
If you're
not,
not in shape,
you're not going to come back. And now imagine if you've been working with a trainer and now you're doing home workouts and now they're giving you grades through a computer screen
you
based on
already
your
know.
home workouts. Like the home workouts are
I'll
a
be eating my
band-aid.
favorite cookies.
It's a band-aid right now. That's all it is. It's like, I'm going to encourage you in order to sustain, and that's okay, you know? Pepperidge Farm is popping. Like, live your best life right
These are
now.
my favorite cookies.
Like right now, the task at hand is
Yep.
getting from day to day and sustaining ourselves in the middle of what is an unnatural reality that we're facing, right? And we literally are attempting to do a one-to-one correlation and replication of what was happening pre this time into this time period, and it doesn't make sense.
Yep.
We have to let it go and realize that if we're letting that go, schools, institutions, economics, this country, the world is going to be functioning differently come like post-COVID, if that's even a thing. That means that we have an opportunity now to inform what that looks like when we like resume business as normal, right? In this new reality that we're stepping into. So I'm like, change it up. Educators literally start every September assessing where their students are and figuring out where they need to go and bridging the gaps. And they oftentimes don't have a clear idea of where they were coming from the year before. Nothing has changed right now. Going into the fall, you're going to do the same thing. And guess what? You actually know that half of them, or that they have not had access to half of the school year. So it makes it really easy. Like, I know that like my 8th graders only got through half of the 7th grade curriculum. So guess where I'm going to start? The second half of the 7th grade curriculum. Going into the 8th grade, maybe I want to consolidate. Maybe those things in the curriculum that I feel like didn't need to be there to begin with, I get to trim them out, right? Like,
yeah.
I get to put that judgment in. It's an opportunity. And honestly, we need to listen to the people on the ground level around what that looks like. Teachers run schools, period. Every day as a school leader, I try to make it as clear as possible. Teachers run the school. My job is to support and to make that as easy and seamless and remove as many barriers as possible from their work. They are more important and more critical than any leader in any building could be. And that doesn't mean that we don't have an important job, but that means if we're not there on a given day, teachers can still run a school.
That's right.
But if teachers are not there on a given day, I can't run an entire school in the absence of them.
Exactly. Yep. We have someone here that said, book dumbing us down. Kai said, speak that truth, bro. Disruption time. There's a lot of people out here who have said it's disruption time. It's time to disrupt. This one said, I joined a Zoom call and the screen projected was the student grade book. There's a lot of people agreeing with you. I'm wondering why there were so many participants, and it was because a grade book with points was being dangled over their head. I can't teach that way. Wow. Yep.
Yeah.
Karen said, a principal said average versus attainment. Okay. How do I disrupt the status quo of grading and engage my students in a different way?
You want me to take that question?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here's my thing, right? Like, as a teacher, out of 180 days in a school year, right? The level of like direct oversight I had around all the micro decisions that I made, like existed for, 0.5% of that time, right? Like, we have a lot more license and ability to do things than oftentimes we allow ourselves to realize. That's been my experience. It's not like a universal truth, but more often than not, that's the case. And really it's just a matter, like, I was always like a forgiveness instead of permission type of person. And I think people have to like decide how they want to orient themselves. I don't make the assumption that everybody's insertion point into like the process of disruption and equity is the same, right? So I think like we do what makes sense within our locus of control. Yeah. If that means that like, people are pushing the grade book and your ability to push back is like, okay, great. Like, this is the area that appears to be non-negotiable. Like, what is negotiable, right? Maybe I can like add on additional grades. I used to do that. I was like, I'm going to give you, like, I have to give you this assessment that's worth this many points. I'm going to give you 10 others that'll help like, dilute that one, because I don't think your grade should be based on 2 assessments over the course of the year, right? Like, we have ways that we can strategically subvert and dismantle disruptive systems. Yeah. And really it's just a matter of like taking a second to say, even though the problem is so big and a lot bigger than us, we have more agency and control than we give ourselves credit for. Yeah. And that's often more true than not.
And I'll add just briefly here, if we're saying we're focusing on the socio-emotional part right now and people come first, a lot of folks are concerned right now around engagement. Like, my students aren't showing up, especially as you go up to high school, right? They're just not showing up, or parents are just like totally opting out to like not show up, not deal with that kind of stress. So what I would suggest is, Kai talked about this Monday, create an environment that is fun where people actually want to come and do it, right? Just literally not even on some learning on learning book work, but just on, let's talk about your favorite song, or we're gonna do a competition and like get to know you at your talents, or
Yeah,
karaoke
absolutely.
Friday, or
Yeah,
you know a heads up game where you're working on your descriptive words. Like those things increase the J factor. And who doesn't want to come and
absolutely.
show up to an environment like that, right? So
Yeah,
when we think about grading, think about, well, how could I strategically even use this space to gain data? Because that's a great, like, really what we should be doing is gathering data to inform our decision making in this time,
yeah. I mean,
right?
so it's like if you want kids to come to class on time, right? You either lock the door, right, so that they can't get in if they're late. You give them a really stern consequence if they don't, or you give them a reason to be in class in the first place. And really,
Exactly.
you have to focus on giving them a reason to do that. And I see like Rakim's on this chat, Malu, like if you go to his IG, you'll see him with his kids in a virtual platform every day, right? He was like, if you had to get like sacrifice a community in New York, which one would it be, and why would you choose the Bronx? Like that's his question of the day to get his like kids there on a daily basis. Because he's like, I'm your linchpin to connect you with the broader community that is like your peers. Who would
Yeah.
not want to be connected with you? You chilling at home, you bored. Like I get to go talk to all my friends today with my teacher, and I like them, and we get to, we learn stuff, and it's engagement and all that stuff. He's commenting here, but like this is happening in those spaces. I would just focus my time on giving people a reason to engage in spaces. I was
Yeah.
literally on a call with a large organization earlier today, where they were training trainers to like train teachers. And the first 5 minutes of the call, the video chat, was setting like norms around like engagement in that space. And it was like, have your camera on, shoot a message if you need to go somewhere, like make sure like you're looking into the camera. It was just like all these things that were about control, even for adults. And I was like, yo, nobody sets norms when they do like a Zoom happy hour with their friends. Nobody does that. Instead, what they do is they create a space. You come as you are, and you're so comfortable that you're like, okay, well, if I need to like walk around and do something in the kitchen, I'm gonna do that in the space because that's okay, and that's a real part of my existence right now. I'm not like, you don't have to ask me to turn my camera on. I want to share. I want to connect. I want to engage. It's a natural human reaction. And if people are choosing not to engage in spaces that are aligned with natural human needs, then that is an indicator to you. That behavior communicates a need or a gap that exists. Bridge that gap and stop controlling like what the visual nature of engagement looks like.
Yeah, I love that. Or even asking, like, hey, what do we need in this space? Like,
Yeah,
what do we
they
need to
know.
make this space productive? I think that's, to me, that's more of a norm. It sounds like what you described was like the rules. Hey, do this, do that. Don't forget to do this, right? Like versus like norms is supposed to be created by the community. There's a lot of really great questions. And you can take any of these, Ahmed. I'm just going to read them
Sure.
out. How can I get students to reach out to me? Concern ideas about the content as opposed to their grade. I think we gave some tips on that, which means if kids are homeschooling, you can't make these decisions outside of families being at the table. Good point. I use discussion questions for engagement. The students pick their own questions and we have discussions every day. Nice. There's an idea. Universal pass. Brain rules number 4. No one listens, pay attention to boring stuff. Good. Teep and C, some of the students admitted that they don't miss school. One of the kids explained how the actual building itself, Chris Edmond explained how the actual building itself has been a place of trauma
Yeah.
historically.
Yo,
Yeah,
that's a weird thing, right?
that's
Like,
real.
yo, what assumptions do you make about kids? Like when a kid was misbehaving and I was interacting with them, it wasn't like, let's talk about the misbehavior, but let's actually talk about why that misbehavior took place.
Why?
Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, hey, you
Yeah,
got into a conflict with somebody and you hurt them or you said something mean to them. Like that's not like human beings are not hardwired to cause harm to one another.
exactly.
So if you've caused harm to someone, right, you're doing something that's just outside of your nature and I have to treat it that way. And it's likely a response to an environmental reality that you are facing in that moment. And if I'm not targeting that, then I'm not gonna like actually address the problem. I'm just gonna be playing whack-a-mole with the behavior. Like that's like I don't miss school. That's an like for me, I'd be like, well, why, right? And likely that has indicated and that has become in their minds in a space where they are not seen as the best version of themselves. And who wants to be in a space like that? That tells you something. If a kid's like, I don't like school, it's not like, oh, you got to do it anyway and figure it out. It's like, damn, that's tragic. Like, how has the school failed? How has an environment that's meant to bring young people together and to inspire them and to spark their knowledge and connect to their truths and build who they are as individuals and set them up to have access to the futures that they choose, how is that a space that you don't want to be in?
Right.
Likely because the space isn't doing that.
Yeah.
We're creating this false exchange where we give them the promise of what like education is going to be for them, and then we don't do it.
We
We
don't
don't do it.
fulfill. We don't
We
carry through on
work
our
hard, be
promise.
nice,
Yes.
and then everything will be good. And then they work hard and be nice, and everything is not good. We lie to them in that situation. We have to like stay true to what we committed that space to be.
Right. Someone said, imagine the students that that the school system has failed. Those students don't want to show up, and I understand.
Yeah.
So Kai, and then let's wrap this up with like maybe like the three big takeaways that you want people to walk away with. Kai said, what is the biggest construct in schools that need to be disrupted to align with an anti-racism agenda?
Ooh, okay.
That's a deep.
Yeah, that is. I mean, what is the number one? Ooh.
Some of the students admitted that they don't miss school. One of the kids explained how the actual building itself, Chris Edmond explained how the actual building itself has been a place of trauma historically.
Yeah. Yo, that's a weird thing, right?
That's
like
real.
Yo, what assumptions do you make about kids? Like when a kid was misbehaving and I was interacting with them, it wasn't like, let's talk about the misbehavior, but let's actually talk about why that misbehavior took place, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, hey, you got into a conflict with somebody and you hurt them or you said something mean to them. Like, that's not like, human beings are not hardwired to cause harm to one another.
Exactly.
So if you've caused harm to someone, right, you're doing something that's just outside of your nature, and I have to treat it that way. And it's likely a response to an environmental reality that you are facing in that moment. And if I'm not targeting that, then I'm not gonna like actually address the problem. I'm just gonna be playing whack-a-mole with the behavior. You know, like that's like, I don't miss school. That's an interest. Like for me, I'd be like, well, why, right? And likely that has indicated, and that has become in their minds in a space where they are not seen as the best version of themselves. And who wants to be in a space like that? That tells you something. If a kid's like, I don't like school, it's not like, oh, you got to do it anyway and figure it out. It's like, damn, that's tragic. Like, how has the school failed? How has an environment that's meant to bring young people together and to inspire them and to spark their knowledge and connect to their truths and build who they are as individuals and set them up to have access to the futures that they choose? How is that a space that you don't want to be in?
Right.
Likely because the space isn't doing that. Yeah. We're creating this false exchange where we give them the promise of what like education is going to be for them, and then we don't do it.
We don't do it. We don't carry through.
Work hard, be nice,
yes.
And then everything will be good. And then they work hard and be nice, and everything is not good. We lie to them in that situation. We have to like stay true to what we committed that space to be.
Right. Someone said, imagine the students that that the school system has failed. Those students don't want to show up, and I understand.
Yeah.
So Kai, and then let's wrap this up with like maybe like the three big takeaways that you want people to walk away with. Kai said, what is the biggest construct in schools that need to be disrupted to align with an anti-racism agenda?
Ooh, okay.
That's a deep.
Yeah, that is. I mean, what is the number one? Ooh.
There's
schools?
Many.
I would say the construct of control. And I think that like can permeate into a lot of things.
Yeah.
Controlling their bodies and their behavior and discipline and that kind of stuff, right? Controlling the information and knowledge that they have access to, controlling the way that they engage with that information and knowledge. Like that is the construct. If you're doing a thing and it is oriented to control or having an idea of what it should look like and appear like and sound like, right? And you're holding kids to that, you're perpetuating dominant realities that are grounded in white supremacist culture. Period.
And let me just say this, like, right, like we grew up in this, right? Like we grew up within all of this, and that work starts with the adults in the building.
Yeah.
If we want to create a space for our kids and for our teachers, it really starts with every single leader doing the work that they need to do, right? To like get the tools, to get the resources, to be able to disrupt the environments that they're in. So wrap us up, Ahmed, like 3 key takeaways from today's talk.
Man, I think like you mentioned this earlier, like one, give yourself grace. Like these are unnatural times. You're doing like crazy heroic work in this moment. And you need to realize that and give yourself the credit that's associated with it. And the second thing is like extend that grace to kids. Like we are all experiencing trauma, right? That reason of like, you know, why an adult might perpetuate something that's destructive for kids, even an adult that shares a lot of aspects of their identity with the students, like that is a trauma response in and of itself, right? You
Yeah.
got internalized oppression, you got like all of that stuff is baked into it. And
Yeah.
and once we recognize that like that is what is happening in that situation, then what we can do is we can work to heal one another instead of to just like control and dictate what it should be, or worst case scenario, carry on like business as usual, right? Because business as usual does not serve the people who would lack the most access to power. And I would say the last thing is like we just got to maintain perspective, right? Like the world is literally in a period of crisis, right? And wherever you are in responding to that is okay and appropriate and welcome. And that is also true for kids. So like identify the areas in which you can and are well positioned to disrupt. And more than anything, squad up. Because if you got an area that you can affect change in, and then you collect or you create an assembly of people who each have different access points, your collective energy, your collective work will get you a lot further than your individual efforts.
Absolutely. Yes. Wow. Thank you, Ahmed, for just blessing us with your presence, with your knowledge, with your expertise, your talent. I know for a fact people are walking away from this live ed chat feeling empowered, um, and feeling like they can take it on, knowing that they have a larger community that will rally behind them. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ahmed. You guys are the bomb.
Of course,
And
man. Thank you for having me. And, thank you for everybody who tuned in.
yes. All right. Enjoy your night, everyone.